She gave up her ticket for a tired father with a child not knowing he was a millionaire CEO. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The bustling terminal at Grand Central Station was alive with echoes of rolling suitcases, footsteps tapping against the polished marble floors, and the distant announcements of train arrivals. Bright fluorescent lights cast a crisp glow over the sea of travelers rushing to their platforms. Among them, a young woman named Sarah Adams stood in line at the ticket counter, clutching her worn leather purse tightly against her chest, her fingers brushing nervously over the last few tickets she had managed to purchase for the long journey home. Her shoulders sagged with exhaustion, her eyes flicking to the digital schedule board displaying trains departing to various cities across the Northeast Corridor. She was running on very little sleep, having worked a double shift at the diner, and the weight of bills and responsibilities pressed heavily on her small frame. As she stepped forward, the line shifted, and she noticed a man standing to the side, holding the hand of a small boy who could not have been more than 6 years old. The boy clutched a stuffed bear tightly, his small feet shuffling nervously against the marble floor. The father appeared weary, his dark suit slightly rumpled, tie loosened, and hair damp from the drizzle outside. Sarah sensed the exhaustion radiating off him, the subtle tension in the way he balanced the child in one arm while fumbling with his briefcase in the other. Her heart tightened instinctively, recognizing a struggle she knew all too well in her own life. The murmurs of the crowd and the clang of rolling luggage faded into a muted background as she approached the counter, ticket in hand. When the cashier announced that there was only one remaining ticket for the 8:30 a.m. train to Boston, Sarah felt an immediate surge of empathy. She looked up at the father and the boy, saw the fatigue etched into their features, and without a second thought, offered her ticket to them. The man blinked in surprise, his eyes wide behind the rim of his glasses, and he opened his mouth to protest. Sarah shook her head quickly, forcing a small, reassuring smile. "Please, take it. You and your son need it more than I do," she said softly. He hesitated, glancing down at the child who was now looking up at her with trusting eyes. And then back at Sarah, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. The boy gave a shy smile, clutching his bear closer as if sensing the kindness extended toward him. As the father accepted the ticket, he murmured his gratitude, the words barely audible over the hum of the terminal, but his expression carried a profound relief. Sarah stepped back, allowing them to move ahead, her mind already shifting to her own plans to find an alternative way home. Yet a subtle warmth blossomed in her chest from the small act of generosity. She watched them weave through the crowd, father supporting his child, both illuminated by the golden glow of the terminal lights, and she felt an unexpected sense of connection, as though their brief encounter had momentarily aligned their lives in a way she could not yet understand. Little did she know that the weary man she had helped was not just any traveler, but Grant Hamilton, the young and accomplished chief executive officer of a major technology firm, a man whose presence commanded rooms, and whose decisions affected the livelihoods of thousands. At that moment, however, all of that was invisible. What mattered was a tired father, his child, and the simple human gesture of kindness that had quietly unfolded in the middle of a busy morning at Grand Central Station. After the brief encounter at the ticket counter, Sarah Adams stepped back from the small commotion, her own ticket now relinquished, and her mind racing through the practicalities of finding another train or arranging a bus for her journey home. The terminal was still filled with the low hum of travelers navigating the maze of gates, their footsteps echoing against the marble floors. She adjusted the strap of her worn leather purse, glancing down at the floor as she tried to calm her racing thoughts. Meanwhile, Grant Hamilton, now holding his young son, Nathan, stepped forward gratefully, gently guiding the boy through the throng of travelers. His movements were deliberate, balancing the briefcase in one hand while supporting Nathan with the other, the weight of both the child and the world momentarily pressing upon his shoulders. Grant had just come from an early morning board meeting at his company headquarters, his schedule already overflowing with conference calls, client presentations, and project deadlines. The day had started hours earlier, with him rising before sunrise to review quarterly reports and respond to emails that could not wait. The exhaustion from sleepless nights and relentless responsibility was etched into the lines of his face, and yet the moment of receiving Sarah's selfless gesture brought a subtle shift in his posture, a small easing of the tension that had built over weeks of unrelenting work. Nathan, clutching his well-loved stuffed bear, looked up at his father with innocent curiosity, oblivious to the complexities of the adult world surrounding him. His small hand slipped into Grant's larger one, fingers curling instinctively around the strength that only a parent could provide. As they made their way toward the gate for the 8:30 a.m. train, Grant's mind momentarily wandered, considering the unusual kindness of the stranger who had stepped aside. He reflected on how rare such unprompted generosity was in a world where people often rushed past one another, eyes fixed on their own agendas, seldom acknowledging the human struggles quietly occurring around them. The crisp winter air from the station entrances swept through the terminal, brushing against his face and slightly dampening his dark hair, but he hardly noticed. His focus was on Nathan, ensuring that the boy's coat was fastened properly, that the small backpack on his shoulders was snug and secure, and that they would board the train safely. At the same time, Sarah turned toward the far end of the terminal, already plotting her next steps. She knew she could not linger, and had to navigate through the city to find an alternate route, possibly taking a later train or coordinating with a long-distance bus service to reach her destination in time. Her stomach tightened slightly at the thought of delays, but the sense of fulfillment from helping someone in need kept her moving forward with determination. Her gaze briefly returned to the man and child she had assisted, catching a glimpse of Grant's eyes, which met hers with a quiet nod of appreciation. She could not have known, in that instant, that this acknowledgement carried far more significance than she realized, that Grant Hamilton was one of the youngest and most influential chief executive officers in the country, and that his position demanded decisions impacting thousands of employees and millions of dollars in assets. To everyone else, he might have appeared as a tired man with a child, just another face among the crowd of commuters and travelers. But the truth was hidden beneath the layers of business suits and executive responsibilities. As the father and son approached the boarding area, they paused briefly, Nathan tugging gently on his father's hand to point at the model trains displayed in a nearby showcase. Grant smiled faintly at his son's curiosity, his fatigue momentarily replaced with a soft warmth reserved only for moments with Nathan. It was in these fleeting instants that Grant felt the balance between his public obligations and private life, the tension between the relentless pace of corporate leadership and the simple joys of parenthood. Sarah, weaving through the crowd toward an information kiosk, kept glancing over her shoulder, curiosity piqued by the interaction she had witnessed, unaware that her decision to give up her ticket would be remembered by the man she had helped. She had acted on instinct, guided by empathy and an understanding of exhaustion and responsibility, and now the consequences of that choice were beginning to ripple in ways she could not yet predict. The crowd moved around her in waves, people speaking in hurried tones, rolling suitcases scraping across the floors, announcements echoing through the vast terminal. In contrast, the small cluster of three, Grant, Nathan, and the distant figure of Sarah, formed a temporary triangle of human connection, each influenced subtly by the other's presence. Grant's mind wandered to the logistics of his day, scheduling adjustments to account for a child's needs and travel delays, yet there was an undercurrent of gratitude for the stranger's kindness. The simple act of giving up a ticket, which could have been overlooked or ignored, resonated with him in a way that contrasted sharply with the often transactional nature of his daily interactions. Nathan, blissfully unaware of the layers of complexity surrounding his father, chattered softly about the miniature trains, prompting a rare, genuine laugh from Grant that echoed lightly against the high ceilings. The sound drew a momentary glance from passing commuters, but neither father nor son minded. Meanwhile, Sarah secured her bag and prepared to seek assistance at the information desk, her mind alive with curiosity about the man she had helped. She thought about the exhaustion etched into his posture, the careful attention he paid to the boy, and the fleeting yet sincere nod of thanks he had given her. In that nod, she sensed an honesty and a depth that set him apart from the crowd, unaware that the man was a prominent chief executive officer, whose life was dictated by schedules, obligations, and the constant pressure to maintain success. As Grant and Nathan disappeared toward the boarding gate, The memory of Sarah's selfless act lingered in Grant's thoughts, planting a seed of recognition and intrigue that would later unfold into an extraordinary connection. And Sarah, continuing her navigation through the station, carried a quiet sense of satisfaction, unaware of how her small decision would begin to intertwine her life with that of the millionaire chief executive officer and his young son, in ways that would reshape the next chapter of both their stories. The morning sun streamed through the large windows of Grant Hamilton's penthouse suite, illuminating the polished oak floors and modern furnishings. But his focus was entirely on his young son, Nathan, who was sitting cross-legged on a soft area rug, carefully lining up his small collection of toy cars. Grant had always treasured these moments, brief as they were, away from the relentless demands of his technology company. Yet the weight of the previous day lingered in his mind. The encounter with Sarah Adams at Grand Central Station had left a subtle impression that he could not shake. Her act of kindness, giving up her train ticket without hesitation, had stirred something within him that contrasted sharply with the constant negotiations, schedules, and decision-making that defined his professional life. While Nathan chatted quietly about which car was the fastest, Grant's thoughts wandered to the faces he saw in the bustling terminal, the expressions of commuters weighed down by exhaustion, and the subtle gestures of humanity that often went unnoticed in a city driven by ambition and haste. He recalled the precise way Sarah had extended the ticket, her eyes showing genuine concern for a father and son. And he felt a deep respect for someone who acted from pure empathy, without expectation of reward. Across the city, Sarah navigated through crowded streets, her coat pulled tightly around her shoulders, feet aching from hurried steps and worn shoes. Yet her mind replayed the fleeting encounter with the man and child she had helped. She could not forget the exhaustion evident on his face, the careful way he adjusted the boy's backpack, or the small, sincere nod he had given her as they moved toward their gate. Despite her own pressing schedule, the memory stayed with her, intertwining curiosity with a quiet satisfaction that came from making a positive impact in someone else's life. She paused at a street corner to check a map, the wind from the city streets brushing her hair across her face, and she thought about the improbability of the situation, how a simple act of giving up a ticket had unexpectedly created a connection that neither she nor the man could have anticipated. Back at the penthouse, Grant settled Nathan onto a stool near the breakfast bar as he prepared a simple meal, carefully arranging the child's plate of scrambled eggs and fresh fruit, while reflecting on the responsibilities that stretched across every hour of his day. The mundane domestic act contrasted starkly with the high stakes of corporate life. Yet it carried a weight and significance that his boardroom meetings could not replicate. He thought about the numerous staff meetings, client calls, and strategic planning sessions that awaited him. But for now, his attention remained on Nathan, ensuring that he felt supported and secure in his father's care. Meanwhile, Sarah finally arrived at her destination, a small cafe where she planned to rest and regroup, her purse still containing only a few personal items, and the lingering sense of having done something meaningful for a stranger. She found a quiet table near the window and took a deep breath, letting the sounds of clinking coffee cups and the soft hum of conversation wash over her, providing a temporary respite from the fast pace of the city streets. Her mind wandered back to Grant and Nathan, wondering about the boy's reaction to the ticket, the relief in the father's eyes, and the unseen layers of the man she had helped, completely unaware that he held one of the most demanding executive positions in the country. Grant, finishing Nathan's breakfast, glanced at the small wristwatch on his left hand, noting the time with a sense of urgency tempered by parental care, and decided that he would make arrangements to adjust his schedule to accommodate both his professional obligations and his son's needs for the day. The intersection of personal responsibility and executive decision-making created a unique tension, but one that was softened by the memory of the small kindness extended to him the previous morning. Nathan, curious and energetic despite the early hour, began asking questions about the world outside their apartment, about the vehicles they saw in the streets below, and about the trains that passed through Grand Central Station. Grant listened attentively, providing answers that were both informative and playful, allowing his son to engage in the wonder of a city filled with endless activity. In the meantime, Sarah, seated at her cafe table, scribbled a few notes in a small journal, capturing her observations and thoughts. Noting the warmth of the cafe's light against the chill of the morning, the aroma of brewed coffee, and the quiet moments of reflection that contrasted with the bustling environment outside. She wrote about the man and child, the simple act of giving, and the unforeseen impact of that gesture, capturing a narrative in her mind that she would revisit throughout the day. Grant, completing the task of sending Nathan off for a brief playdate with a neighbor under careful supervision, returned to his home office, sitting at a sleek desk that overlooked the city skyline, where the weight of his professional responsibilities awaited. He opened a laptop and began reviewing reports. Yet even in this environment dominated by numbers, projections, and deadlines, his thoughts frequently drifted back to Sarah, to the integrity and selflessness she had displayed, and to the possibility that such encounters could lead to meaningful connections beyond the transactional nature of corporate life. The day unfolded with careful balance, each action guided by duty and consideration, while the invisible thread of human kindness persisted between Sarah Adams and Grant Hamilton, setting the stage for further interactions that neither of them could yet anticipate, and planting the seeds for a story where compassion, chance, and circumstance would intersect to shape the coming events of their intertwined lives. Sarah Adams stepped out of the cozy cafe into the crisp morning air, the city streets alive with the rhythm of commuters hustling toward their destinations. Her thoughts kept returning to Grant Hamilton and his young son, Nathan, wondering how they had settled into their day after the small but meaningful encounter at Grand Central Station. As she navigated through the crowd, she felt a mixture of curiosity and quiet anticipation, the memory of the father's relieved expression and the boy's shy smile lingering in her mind. Meanwhile, Grant had completed his morning routine with Nathan, ensuring that his son had dressed warmly for the day ahead and had eaten a hearty breakfast before leaving for a supervised playdate in the apartment building's common room. The sunlight streamed through the large windows, reflecting off the glass facades of nearby skyscrapers, casting patterns on the polished floors of the penthouse. Grant sat at the edge of a leather chair, running his fingers over a neatly stacked folder of company documents, yet his mind was partially consumed by the fleeting interaction with Sarah. Her generosity had left an impression that contrasted sharply with the transactional encounters he experienced daily in boardrooms and client meetings. Nathan's laughter echoed from the play area as he engaged with a small group of children, and Grant smiled, the sound warming the large, modern apartment. He reflected on the delicate balance of being a parent and a chief executive officer, recognizing the challenge of maintaining compassion in both arenas. Grant's thoughts kept circling back to the stranger who had offered her ticket, realizing how rare it was to witness an act of pure empathy that required no acknowledgement or reward. Across town, Sarah walked toward a local community center where she had volunteered in the past, using the time between travel arrangements to engage in small acts of service that resonated with her values. Her mind replayed the father and son, imagining the relief that had washed over their faces, and she felt a sense of fulfillment that propelled her steps forward. The ambient noise of traffic, distant sirens, and conversations in multiple languages created a symphony of urban life. But in her own mind, Sarah was focused entirely on the human connection she had witnessed. Grant, checking in on Nathan remotely through the apartment building's security system, observed the boy engaged in creative play, constructing miniature towers with blocks and sharing laughter with other children. The simplicity and innocence of these moments reminded Grant of the grounding elements in life that often went unnoticed amid professional pressures. After ensuring that Nathan was safely occupied, Grant returned to his office space, a glass-enclosed area overlooking the city skyline, and began the process of reviewing important strategic reports. The juxtaposition of city life below with the order and precision of his workspace above emphasized the separation between public success and private responsibility. Despite this, his thoughts repeatedly drifted to Sarah, and he considered whether the circumstances that had brought them together might be more than mere coincidence. Meanwhile, Sarah found a quiet bench in a nearby park, watching parents guide their children along walking paths, the crisp air carrying the scent of autumn leaves. She reflected on her own upbringing, the lessons of empathy instilled by her family, and the satisfaction of contributing, even in small ways, to the well-being of others. She wondered what the father's life entailed beyond the fleeting glimpse she had received, and felt a subtle anticipation of a connection that seemed beyond her control. Grant, amidst reviewing company memos and financial projections, drafted a brief note to his assistant requesting a minor adjustment to his schedule to allow for a brief personal engagement later in the day. His awareness of the human element, sharpened by Sarah's act of generosity, reminded him that life was a delicate balance between responsibility and spontaneous kindness. The morning continued with both of them engaging in their separate routines, yet an invisible thread seemed to link their actions and decisions, shaping the events that would unfold. Nathan, excited and curious, asked questions about the trains he had seen the day before, prompting Grant to explain in simple terms the intricacies of travel and the importance of preparation, bridging a gap between childlike wonder and the realities of the adult world. Sarah, sitting in the park with her notebook open, jotted down observations and reflections, capturing the small gestures and moments of connection that resonated deeply with her sense of purpose. The city moved around them, indifferent in its scale and pace, yet in these carefully observed moments, both Sarah and Grant were aware of the subtle impact one person's actions could have on another's life. As the morning shifted toward midday, Grant prepared to leave the apartment briefly to attend a series of meetings, carefully planning logistics to accommodate both professional obligations and parental duties. Sarah, having spent some time in quiet reflection, rose from her bench and adjusted her coat against the cool breeze, making her way toward the transportation hub she would need to catch a later train. The narrative of their morning experiences highlighted the contrast between public and private worlds, between duty and spontaneous generosity, and set the stage for the unfolding story of connection, empathy, and unforeseen consequences that would continue to intertwine their lives in ways neither of them could yet predict. The evening settled over New York City with a gentle amber glow from the streetlights reflecting off wet pavement, and the faint hum of traffic provided a steady rhythm to the bustling metropolis. Sarah Adams walked briskly along the sidewalk, her coat wrapped tightly around her shoulders, the leather of her purse worn smooth from constant use. Her mind wandered back to the earlier morning encounter at Grand Central Station, and she could not shake the image of the father, Grant Hamilton, carefully guiding his young son, Nathan, through the crowd. The way he had balanced responsibility with patience had impressed her deeply, and she found herself wondering about the lives of people she would otherwise never have crossed paths with. Nathan, unaware of the complexities of adult life, had a small bounce in his step as Grant led him through the apartment building after their brief morning playdate. The young boy clutched his stuffed bear, occasionally glancing up at his father with questions about the world beyond their apartment windows. Grant smiled softly at his son's curiosity, momentarily pushing aside the mental load of his corporate responsibilities to fully engage in these simple moments of parenthood. The warmth in the apartment contrasted sharply with the chill outside, and the soft hum of the heating system combined with the distant sounds of city life created a cocoon of security and normalcy. Meanwhile, Sarah arrived at a small public library she often used as a quiet space to plan and reflect. She found a corner seat near a large window overlooking a busy intersection and set her purse down, leaning forward to jot notes in a small journal she carried with her. Her thoughts focused on the father and child, the fatigue etched into their expressions, and the small, seemingly insignificant act of giving up her train ticket, which had nonetheless created a moment of human connection that lingered in her mind. Grant, having settled Nathan with a storybook and a snack, returned to his home office, a glass-enclosed space with a commanding view of the city skyline. The room was quiet, the only sounds being the soft tapping of a keyboard and the occasional distant siren. He reviewed a series of financial reports, yet the encounter with Sarah remained present in his mind, reminding him of the value of empathy and spontaneous kindness amid the structured rigor of corporate life. He considered how rare it was to witness selfless action in a world dominated by deadlines and profit margins, and the thought of Sarah's generosity sparked an unfamiliar curiosity about her life and motivations. Nathan, giggling at an illustration in his book, called out a question about a train, prompting Grant to kneel beside him and provide an answer that balanced factual explanation with playful engagement. The interaction brought laughter and warmth into the room, the child's energy a welcome reprieve from the weight of adult concerns. Outside, the city streets were alive with movement, but within the library, Sarah felt a sense of calm as she continued to write, capturing the essence of the morning encounter and the emotions it had stirred. She reflected on the significance of small acts, realizing that her decision to give up the train ticket had resonated far beyond the immediate moment, influencing not just the father and son, but potentially the unfolding narrative of their day. Grant, after reviewing his reports, made a brief phone call to his assistant to confirm the scheduling of afternoon meetings. Yet even these routine tasks were colored by the memory of Sarah's act of kindness. He found himself unconsciously anticipating the possibility of encountering her again, the thought adding a subtle tension to the otherwise structured rhythm of his day. Nathan, still engaged with his toys, occasionally looked up to ask for guidance or reassurance, and Grant responded with patience, explaining concepts and answering questions in a way that nurtured both curiosity and confidence. The afternoon light shifted as the sun moved lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the penthouse floors and creating a warm glow that reflected off the sleek surfaces of the furnishings. Sarah, observing the street below from her library window, noticed families walking together, children laughing, and commuters hurrying home, and she allowed herself a moment of quiet appreciation for the interwoven lives in the city. She wrote about the father and child, the simple act of generosity, and the unseen layers of human connection that were often overlooked in the rush of daily life. Grant, glancing at the clock, realized it was time to prepare for an evening engagement with a client, yet he lingered for a moment longer with Nathan, sharing a quiet conversation and enjoying the fleeting tranquility of domestic life. The balance between professional obligations and personal moments, between public perception and private experience, created a tapestry of emotion that neither Grant nor Sarah had anticipated that morning. As the city moved through its evening rhythm, the invisible thread connecting Sarah and Grant persisted, shaped by empathy, human kindness, and the unforeseen resonance of one simple decision that had begun to intertwine their lives in ways both profound and unexpected, setting the stage for the next chapter of encounters and revelations that would continue to unfold in the lives of the father, his son, and the young woman who had chosen generosity over convenience. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, with the early sunlight filtering through the tall glass windows of Grant Hamilton's penthouse, casting long golden beams across the polished wooden floors. Grant woke before sunrise, the familiar weight of responsibilities pressing against his consciousness as he moved quietly around the apartment, careful not to disturb Nathan, who was still nestled under a soft comforter, breathing evenly in sleep. The previous days lingered in Grant's thoughts, particularly the unexpected kindness of Sarah Adams, a stranger who had offered her train ticket without hesitation, an act that had left a lasting impression far beyond its simplicity. He dressed quickly in a well-tailored suit, the fabric cool and smooth under his fingers, and reviewed his day's schedule, noting meetings with clients, strategy sessions with his executive team, and a critical conference call regarding a new technology launch. Despite the pressing corporate obligations, Grant's mind repeatedly wandered to the young woman who had so selflessly intervened on behalf of him and his son, the memory of her empathy starkly contrasting the transactional interactions he often experienced in business settings. Nathan, roused by the faint sound of his father moving about the apartment, rubbed his eyes and yawned, climbing out of bed to find his father already preparing breakfast in the kitchen area. The boy's small footsteps padded softly against the wooden floors as he climbed onto a stool at the breakfast bar, observing the careful arrangement of plates, utensils, and a simple yet nourishing meal of scrambled eggs, toast, and fresh fruit. Grant engaged Nathan in conversation about the day ahead, asking questions about his classes, his playtime, and the book he had been reading, and responded patiently to each inquiry, fostering a sense of stability and comfort in the midst of their structured morning routine. Meanwhile, across the city, Sarah Adams navigated through crowded sidewalks, balancing a small satchel on her shoulder and glancing frequently at the transit map she carried, calculating the most efficient route to her workplace for the day. Her thoughts remained tied to Grant and Nathan, wondering how they had fared after the brief encounter at the station, and she felt a subtle anticipation, the curiosity of what lives might intersect again and under what circumstances. The streets were alive with the rhythm of the morning commute, car horns echoing against brick facades, the sound of rolling suitcases scraping against the sidewalk, and the distant hum of conversation from other pedestrians filling the air. Sarah paused at a street corner, watching a father guide his child across the crosswalk, the scene briefly mirroring her memory of Grant and Nathan, and a quiet smile formed on her lips as she considered the shared human experience of care and responsibility. Grant, after ensuring Nathan had eaten and was ready for the day, helped him into a warm coat and secured his small backpack, adjusting the straps to ensure comfort and safety. They walked together through the lobby of the apartment building, greeting neighbors and observing the children at play in the common area, Nathan occasionally skipping ahead to inspect a favorite toy or wave at a familiar friend. As they exited the building to wait for the car service that would take them to school, Grant reflected on the delicate balance required to manage both the life of a chief executive officer and the needs of a young child, understanding that each moment of attention he provided to Nathan contributed to the stability and growth of his son's world. The car arrived promptly, and Grant assisted Nathan into the back seat, buckling him securely while exchanging pleasantries with the driver about traffic patterns and the expected travel time to the school. Nathan chattered happily, his youthful energy a contrast to the measured and calculated demeanor his father carried in public life. After ensuring his son's comfort, Grant stepped back, watching the small vehicle disappear into the city streets, a quiet sense of fulfillment mingling with the lingering stress of the day's professional obligations. Across town, Sarah reached the entrance of her workplace, taking a moment to adjust her coat and gather her belongings before stepping inside. The office was quiet, filled with the subdued hum of early morning preparations, and she navigated through the space toward her desk, greeting colleagues with a soft smile. Her thoughts returned repeatedly to the brief interaction with Grant and Nathan, the vividness of their expressions, and the silent gratitude exchanged, and she considered how this fleeting moment of human connection could influence her perspective and interactions throughout the day. Grant returned to his home office, reviewing key documents and preparing for a series of meetings, while reflecting on the extraordinary coincidence of encountering someone who acted with genuine empathy. The memory of Sarah's selfless action contrasted sharply with the demanding decisions and negotiations he faced in his professional life, offering a subtle reminder of the impact that individual choices could have on the lives of others. Throughout the morning, both Grant and Sarah moved through their respective routines, the invisible connection formed by an act of kindness continuing to exert an influence over their thoughts, shaping perceptions and setting the stage for future encounters. Nathan engaged with his educational activities, asking questions and exploring new ideas, while Grant balanced his attention between professional obligations and parental responsibilities, recognizing the importance of maintaining focus on both domains. Sarah, immersed in her work and observing the small details of daily life around her, carried a quiet sense of anticipation, unaware that her initial gesture would continue to resonate in ways that neither she nor Grant could yet foresee, quietly intertwining their paths and establishing the foundation for the unfolding narrative of empathy, human connection, and unforeseen opportunities that lay ahead. The afternoon sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long, soft shadows across the streets of New York City, and the air carried a gentle chill that hinted at the approaching autumn evening. Sarah Adams walked briskly through the city's sidewalks, her shoes clicking against the pavement as she navigated the familiar route toward a small community center where she occasionally volunteered. Her thoughts, however, were far from the bustling streets around her. She could not shake the image of Grant Hamilton and his young son, Nathan, from her mind, recalling the careful way he had guided the boy through the crowded station and the small smile he had offered in silent gratitude for her gesture. She pondered the layers of his life that remained invisible in that brief encounter, the weight of responsibility, the exhaustion, and yet the kindness that had shone through in the simplest form of human connection. Grant, in his penthouse apartment, had just returned from a series of midday meetings, each one meticulously planned and executed with the precision expected of a chief executive officer of a major technology firm. He set down his briefcase and removed his suit jacket, his movements deliberate and measured, a brief respite before attending to his personal responsibilities. Nathan sat cross-legged on the living room rug, his small hands holding a picture book as he narrated an imaginative story about trains and explorers, his voice animated and bright, filling the spacious apartment with life. Grant knelt beside him, listening attentively, occasionally offering suggestions or asking questions to encourage creativity and thought. His professional demeanor softened by the warmth and trust shared with his son. Across town, Sarah entered the community center, greeted by the familiar scent of polished wood floors and the soft murmur of volunteers preparing for afternoon activities. She moved toward a table filled with school supplies and small care packages, her movements purposeful as she organized materials for distribution to families in need. Her mind remained on Grant and Nathan, the memory of their expressions and interactions lingering as a quiet source of motivation and reflection. Meanwhile, Grant concluded Nathan's playtime and helped him prepare for the afternoon lesson at a nearby enrichment program, carefully ensuring the boy's backpack was packed with all necessary materials and that his coat was properly fastened for the chilly weather. The elevator ride down to the street level was quiet, punctuated only by Nathan's occasional observations about the city outside and his father's patient responses, fostering a sense of continuity and stability in their routine. Sarah, seated at a small table in the center's common room, began writing notes in a journal she carried, reflecting on the early morning events at the station, the father and child, and the extraordinary coincidence that had placed her at the right place at the right time. She considered the ripple effect of small acts of kindness, how they could alter the course of a day or even a life, and she felt a subtle anticipation that their paths might cross again under circumstances yet to be revealed. Grant, returning to the penthouse briefly before picking Nathan up, reviewed a set of reports and project updates, each number and chart a reflection of the broader responsibilities he carried. Yet even amid this structured, high-stakes environment, his thoughts wandered back to Sarah, the stranger whose spontaneous generosity had left a profound impression. He considered the rarity of such empathy in a world dominated by schedules, deadlines, and expectations, and he found himself quietly intrigued by the character and integrity of the young woman he had helped. Nathan, lively and curious, asked questions about the trains and the bustling station, prompting his father to explain in patient detail, bridging the concepts of travel logistics with stories that nurtured both understanding and imagination. Sarah, observing families and children as she prepared care packages, felt a renewed sense of purpose, the image of Nathan and Grant reinforcing the importance of attentiveness and compassion in daily life. The city moved around them, indifferent to individual stories. Yet within these moments, the lives of Sarah, Grant, and Nathan were subtly intertwined, connected by the thread of human kindness, initiated by a single selfless act. As the afternoon progressed, Grant prepared to leave with Nathan for his enrichment program, ensuring all practical matters were handled and that his son felt confident and secure. Sarah, finishing her volunteer tasks, packed her belongings and stepped out into the crisp air, reflecting on the morning's events and the ways in which a simple choice to help could resonate far beyond its initial moment. The streets were filled with the ambient sounds of city life, the chatter of passers-by, distant sirens, and the rolling wheels of bicycles and cars, blending into a continuous hum. Yet amidst this urban symphony, the quiet impact of human connection persisted, shaping the thoughts and actions of both Sarah and Grant, planting seeds for encounters and experiences that would continue to unfold. Nathan, walking beside his father, chattered excitedly about the illustrations in his books and the adventures he imagined, while Grant responded with patience and encouragement, reinforcing the bond between parent and child. Sarah, crossing the busy intersection, glanced briefly at the train station in the distance, recalling the fleeting yet meaningful interaction that had begun to intertwine her life with that of the father and son. Each step, each decision, carried the weight of intention and empathy, setting the stage for future encounters, challenges, and discoveries that neither Sarah nor Grant could yet foresee, and marking the subtle beginnings of a story defined by connection, understanding, and the unexpected consequences of a single act of kindness. Grant Hamilton guided Nathan through the bustling streets toward the enrichment program, the crisp autumn air carrying the distant sounds of honking cars, chatter from pedestrians, and the occasional wail of a siren blending into the ambient rhythm of New York City. Nathan's small hand gripped his father's firmly, the stuffed bear tucked under his arm, and his eyes sparkled with curiosity as he pointed at a street performer playing a violin on the corner. Grant smiled, adjusting Nathan's coat to keep him warm, and replied patiently, explaining the music in simple terms while fostering his son's imagination and appreciation for small moments of beauty amid the urban landscape. Across town, Sarah Adams walked with deliberate steps toward her office, the weight of her satchel against her shoulder, a constant reminder of the day's responsibilities. Her mind, however, remained partly occupied with thoughts of Grant and Nathan. She reflected on the earlier encounter at Grand Central Station, the father's careful attention to his son, and the subtle yet profound impact that her small act of giving up the train ticket had created. She considered the possibility of crossing paths with them again, and felt a quiet anticipation mixed with the natural anxiety of human connection. Grant arrived at the entrance of the enrichment program, the familiar facade of the building welcoming him and Nathan. Inside, the warm lighting contrasted with the chilly streets outside, and the faint hum of children's laughter and soft conversations created a soothing atmosphere. Grant knelt to Nathan's level, confirming that the young boy had everything he needed and that his backpack was secure. Nathan looked up with a grin and ran toward the classroom, the small group of children and their caregivers already engaged in activities. Grant observed from the doorway for a moment, ensuring his son's safety, and then stepped back into the hall to make a brief phone call. He dialed the number of his assistant, confirming the afternoon schedule and making minor adjustments to accommodate an important meeting later in the day. Even during these brief administrative tasks, Grant's mind revisited Sarah's gesture, her willingness to put another's needs ahead of her own, and the contrast between her spontaneous empathy and the structured decisions he navigated daily as chief executive officer. Meanwhile, Sarah had reached her office, a modest space within a busy nonprofit organization. She greeted colleagues and arranged materials for an upcoming community outreach project, all the while replaying in her mind the expressions of Grant and Nathan at the station. She reflected on the significance of small acts of kindness, how a single choice could ripple outward, affecting lives in ways not immediately visible, and she felt a quiet sense of fulfillment in knowing she had been part of such a moment. Grant, finishing his call, decided to take a brief walk along the terrace adjoining his office, overlooking the streets below. The urban panorama, with its mixture of modern skyscrapers and historic architecture, provided a momentary escape from the pressures of his professional world. He considered the fatherly responsibilities he bore alongside the corporate ones, and the balance he constantly sought between efficiency and empathy. Nathan's laughter and energy earlier that morning had reminded him of the importance of presence, of noticing the small gestures that built trust and comfort, lessons that extended beyond parenting into the realm of leadership. At the same time, Sarah, seated at her desk, drafted emails and coordinated schedules, yet her thoughts drifted repeatedly to the father and son, the images of them navigating the station with care and attentiveness, forming a mental montage she could not dismiss. She considered how the brief exchange had left an impression on her own understanding of human connection, empathy, and the unforeseen outcomes that might arise from decisions made without expectation of reward. Grant returned to his office after the terrace, reviewing project proposals and financial reports. Yet his attention was fragmented by curiosity and reflection on the morning's events. The juxtaposition of complex corporate responsibilities and the simplicity of human generosity created a tension in his mind, highlighting the importance of values beyond profit and efficiency. Nathan, engaged in classroom activities, asked questions via a quick text to his father, prompting Grant to respond with guidance, patience, and encouragement, reinforcing the ongoing bond and communication between parent and child even when physically separated. Sarah, taking a brief break, observed the world outside the office window, noticing families walking, children playing, and strangers exchanging brief acts of kindness on the street, each small scene echoing the principles she valued and had demonstrated earlier that day. Grant, preparing for the transition from the enrichment program back to the demands of corporate meetings, reflected on the potential for meaningful encounters to shape one's perspective and priorities. He considered the ways in which empathy, attention, and recognition of others' needs could influence decisions, not just in personal life but in professional contexts. The invisible thread connecting Sarah, Grant, and Nathan persisted through the afternoon, subtle yet significant, each action, each observation, each reflection contributing to an evolving narrative of human connection, compassion, and the unfolding consequences of choices made in moments of genuine care. As the city moved through its daily rhythm, the foundation for future intersections, challenges, and developments between these three individuals was quietly being laid, guided by empathy, attentiveness, and the unanticipated resonance of one small act of generosity that had begun to shape the trajectory of their lives. As the late afternoon sunlight filtered through the tall windows of Grant Hamilton's penthouse, casting long, warm streaks across the polished wooden floors, he sat at his glass desk, reviewing a series of documents for an upcoming client presentation. The rhythmic tapping of his pen against the desk accompanied his thoughts, which, despite the pressing corporate matters before him, kept returning to the brief encounter with Sarah Adams at Grand Central Station. Her act of kindness, giving up her train ticket without hesitation, had left a lasting impression on him, one that contrasted sharply with the transactional interactions he faced daily in boardrooms and meetings. Nathan, his young son, was busy in the adjacent play area, stacking blocks and creating intricate towers with careful concentration. Grant watched him for a moment, smiling softly as the boy occasionally glanced up with questions about the world beyond their apartment windows, prompting explanations that blended fact with imaginative storytelling. Across town, Sarah Adams was leaving the community center, having completed her afternoon volunteering tasks. She gathered her belongings and stepped out onto the bustling city streets, the cool breeze brushing against her face as she walked toward the nearby subway station. Her mind replayed the father and child from the morning, the subtle exhaustion in Grant's posture, the careful attention he gave Nathan, and the quiet gratitude in his eyes when he accepted the train ticket she had offered. The memory stirred a sense of curiosity and anticipation within her, an unspoken question of how lives intersect in fleeting moments of empathy and human connection. Grant, finishing a quick call with his assistant to confirm the details of the evening's meetings, glanced at the clock and realized he had a brief window before he needed to prepare for the next engagement. He decided to use the time to check in with Nathan remotely via a video call, ensuring the boy was still focused on his activities and providing guidance in a gentle, supportive manner. Nathan giggled as he showed his father the block towers he had built, and Grant responded with encouragement and playful remarks, reinforcing their bond and maintaining a sense of continuity, despite the separation by distance and adult responsibilities. Sarah, descending into the subway station, observed the flow of commuters with a quiet attentiveness, noticing parents helping their children, strangers offering directions, and small acts of courtesy that mirrored the gesture she had extended earlier. She reflected on the significance of empathy in daily life and the subtle ways in which one person's actions could influence the course of another's day, much as her choice to give up the train ticket had unexpectedly resonated with Grant and Nathan. Grant, after ensuring Nathan was settled and engaged in his activities, took a moment to step out onto the terrace adjoining the penthouse office. The city skyline stretched before him, the streets alive with traffic, pedestrians, and the sounds of urban life. The view offered a temporary respite from the enclosed pressures of corporate decision-making, and he considered the rarity of encountering someone whose intentions were purely selfless, unburdened by ulterior motives or expectations. Nathan's laughter and excitement earlier in the day lingered in his mind, a reminder of the importance of presence and attentiveness, not only as a parent but also as a leader responsible for guiding others. Sarah, riding the subway toward her next destination, gazed out the window at the blur of buildings, the movement of the city reflecting a constant flux of human interaction and unseen stories. Her thoughts returned repeatedly to the father and child, imagining the small, ordinary moments that carried profound significance when approached with care and attention. Grant, preparing for a brief transition to his evening commitments, reflected on the subtle yet powerful impact of Sarah's gesture, recognizing how a simple act of kindness could influence perceptions, attitudes, and perhaps even future decisions in ways that transcended the immediate moment. Nathan, curious and animated, continued to explore his surroundings and ask questions about the world, prompting Grant to provide explanations and guidance that balanced factual accuracy with imaginative storytelling, reinforcing both knowledge and confidence. Sarah, now walking along a quieter street lined with trees and small shops, felt a sense of anticipation and reflection, considering the unseen consequences of her choices and the possibility that their paths might intersect again in unexpected ways. Grant, observing the city from the terrace, recognized the delicate interplay of personal responsibility and professional duty, the balance between being present for his son and managing the demands of a high-profile corporate career. The afternoon continued to unfold with each character engaged in their respective routines, yet the invisible thread connecting Sarah, Grant, and Nathan persisted, subtle but undeniable. Each thought, each action, each reflection contributed to the evolving narrative of connection, empathy, and unforeseen consequences, setting the stage for the moments, decisions, and encounters that would ultimately intertwine their lives more closely than they could yet imagine. As the late afternoon light began to fade into the soft golden hues of early evening, Grant Hamilton prepared to leave his penthouse for a scheduled business dinner with a prominent client. He checked Nathan's homework and lunchbox for the following day, ensuring everything was complete and properly organized, then carefully placed his son's jacket and small backpack near the door. Nathan, excited yet slightly tired from the day's activities, clutched his stuffed bear tightly and chattered about his favorite part of the afternoon, sharing details with his father about new friends he had met and the stories they had created together. Grant knelt to Nathan's level, listening intently, nodding, and offering encouragement, feeling a warm sense of connection despite the demands awaiting him in the professional world. Meanwhile, Sarah Adams had returned home from her afternoon volunteer work, the streets alive with the early evening bustle of commuters, honking taxis, and pedestrians navigating the sidewalks with hurried steps. She carried a small notebook in which she recorded observations, thoughts, and reflections about the father and child she had encountered at Grand Central Station. The act of giving up her train ticket continued to resonate in her mind, and she pondered the subtle yet profound impact such a small gesture could have on others, particularly on the father, who had demonstrated both patience and quiet strength while guiding his young son. Grant, stepping into his sleek black sedan, instructed the driver to proceed carefully through the city traffic, mindful of arriving at the restaurant on time while considering the ever-changing patterns of New York streets. The traffic hummed around him, yet his attention intermittently returned to the memory of the stranger who had shown such selfless generosity that morning. The juxtaposition of corporate obligation with the spontaneous kindness he had witnessed reminded him of the importance of human connection, a factor often overlooked in the rigorous calculations of business decisions. Nathan, safely inside the apartment before Grant's departure, arranged his books and toys for the next day, occasionally looking out the window to watch the city streets below, unaware of the influence his brief morning interaction with Sarah had had on his father's thoughts and reflections. Sarah, walking toward her apartment building, observed families and children along the street, small gestures of care and attention occurring throughout the bustling environment, reinforcing her understanding of the significance of everyday acts of kindness. Grant arrived at the restaurant, the valet swiftly taking his vehicle as he adjusted his suit jacket and straightened his tie. The dining area was warm and well lit, with soft background music providing a gentle ambiance that contrasted with the sharp edges of business negotiations he had been navigating throughout the day. He greeted the client courteously, exchanging handshakes and pleasantries before settling into the discussion of contracts, deadlines, and strategic plans. Despite the focus required for these matters, his thoughts continued to intermittently drift toward the morning encounter at the station. The small act of generosity that had unexpectedly left a strong impression, prompting him to consider the ways in which empathy and attentiveness could influence decisions and relationships beyond professional boundaries. Sarah, seated on her sofa at home, reflected on the day's experiences, her mind drawn back to Grant and Nathan, replaying the father's careful attention to his son and the boy's innocent curiosity. She considered the possibility of future encounters, the subtle threads of connection that had been formed through one small act of selflessness, and the ways in which such moments could ripple through lives in unforeseen ways. Grant, engaging with the client over dinner, balanced professionalism with attentive listening, his responses measured yet thoughtful, demonstrating a capacity for both strategic thinking and personal engagement. He observed the nuances of conversation, the subtleties of body language, and the intentions behind words, all while a small, persistent awareness of Sarah's kindness lingered at the back of his mind, shaping his reflections on human behavior and personal values. Nathan, preparing for bed under the supervision of a trusted caregiver, recounted stories from his day, his imagination vivid, his curiosity unabated, and Grant smiled quietly, recognizing the importance of fostering both learning and emotional connection in his son's life. Sarah, making a cup of tea, reviewed her journal entries, the act of writing providing clarity and focus, while reinforcing the significance of intentional decisions and thoughtful actions. The memory of the father and child, the subtle gratitude expressed, and the quiet impact of one act of generosity continued to occupy her thoughts, a reminder of the ways in which human connections, even brief and seemingly inconsequential, could influence outcomes and relationships in unexpected and meaningful ways. Grant concluded his business dinner and returned home, the city lights reflecting off the darkened windows of the streets below. He checked on Nathan, ensuring his son was settled for the evening, and reflected on the intertwining of professional obligations, parental responsibilities, and the enduring impact of kindness, setting the stage for the moments, interactions, and revelations that would continue to shape the evolving narrative of their lives. Linking Sarah, Grant, and Nathan in ways neither could yet fully anticipate, and highlighting the quiet power of empathy to bridge the gaps between strangers, responsibilities, and the unpredictable flow of life. The following morning began with the soft glow of sunlight filtering through the tall windows of Sarah Adams' apartment, painting the room in warm golden hues and reflecting off the worn wooden floors. She stirred a cup of freshly brewed coffee in her favorite mug and glanced out the window at the streets below, watching the city awaken with the familiar sounds of honking taxis, chattering pedestrians, and the rhythmic clatter of subway trains beneath the pavement. Her thoughts, as they had been since the morning at Grand Central Station, returned to Grant Hamilton and his young son, Nathan. The memory of the father's careful guidance and Nathan's innocent curiosity remained vivid, stirring a quiet anticipation in her mind about how such lives might intersect again in the days to come. Grant, already up in his penthouse, reviewed his schedule for the day while seated at the edge of his leather chair, the skyline of New York stretching endlessly beyond the glass walls of the apartment. He was preparing for a brief visit to a community initiative his company was sponsoring, a project designed to support local families and children, and the memory of Sarah's selfless act remained with him, prompting a subtle reflection on the significance of human kindness and the unforeseen consequences it could set into motion. Nathan, brushing his teeth with the meticulous focus of a young child proud of his routine, called out questions about the city he saw through the windows, his voice animated and bright, and Grant responded patiently, offering explanations that balanced practical knowledge with playful engagement. Across town, Sarah organized her notes and volunteer materials, jotting down reflections from previous community activities, while keeping a mental note of the timing necessary to attend a local workshop later in the morning. Her curiosity about Grant and Nathan had grown, not in an intrusive way but as a natural extension of her empathy, wondering how lives intersect in fleeting moments, and how a small act could resonate in ways that neither participant could fully anticipate. Grant left the apartment with Nathan, securing the young boy in his car seat and fastening the straps with careful attention. The crisp morning air carried the distant hum of traffic and the faint aroma of street vendors preparing breakfast, blending into the rhythm of the city. Nathan pointed to passing buildings, the sun reflecting off the glass facades, and Grant responded with stories about the history of the city and the structures they were seeing, nurturing both curiosity and appreciation for the world beyond their immediate surroundings. Sarah, meanwhile, walked briskly through a park she often passed on her route to the workshop, the soft rustle of fallen leaves underfoot marking the seasonal change as the city's residents moved purposefully toward their own destinations. She reflected on the morning at the train station, the father and child, and the subtle trust and gratitude expressed in their brief exchange. The image of Grant's attentive care for Nathan lingered in her mind, reinforcing her understanding of the importance of empathy and the power of small, deliberate actions. Grant arrived at the community initiative, helping Nathan out of the car and ensuring he had his jacket and belongings before leading him toward the building. The initiative was already bustling with volunteers and families preparing for the day's activities, and Grant observed with quiet satisfaction as Nathan joined a group of children engaged in creative projects, carefully balancing the child's excitement with guidance and support. Sarah, entering her workshop, found her seat and began setting up materials for the participants, her hands busy while her mind remained reflective. She observed the small details around her, the attentive care of other volunteers, the focus of the children, and the subtle gestures of patience and guidance, and her thoughts continued to drift toward the morning encounter, the father and his son. Grant, observing Nathan from a distance, checked that his son was comfortable and engaged, then allowed himself a few moments to speak with the program coordinator about schedules, responsibilities, and logistics. His attention, however, returned repeatedly to the morning at Grand Central Station. The act of generosity that had captured his attention and sparked a sense of curiosity about the stranger who had demonstrated such empathy without expectation of reward. Sarah concluded her workshop activities and gathered her belongings, stepping outside to feel the sun on her face and the gentle breeze carrying the sounds of the city. She reflected on the unfolding connections that began with small acts of kindness and the ways in which human interaction, however brief, could influence perception, empathy, and future decisions. Grant, concluding his duties at the initiative, walked Nathan back to the car, listening to the boy excitedly recount his morning experiences, and responded with encouragement and attention, reinforcing their bond and the values of responsibility, care, and curiosity. The day progressed with both Sarah and Grant immersed in their respective routines, yet the invisible thread connecting them through that morning encounter persisted, shaping thoughts, reflections, and anticipations, subtly setting the stage for future interactions and the development of a narrative founded on empathy, human connection, and the unforeseen resonance of one small act of generosity that continued to ripple through their lives. The late afternoon brought a subtle change in the air as golden sunlight filtered through the tall city buildings, casting long shadows along the streets and sidewalks. Sarah Adams walked briskly through the bustling avenues, her coat wrapped tightly around her shoulders, the weight of her satchel a familiar presence as she navigated the familiar route to the subway station. Her thoughts, as they had been all day, circled back to Grant Hamilton and his young son, Nathan. She recalled the father's careful guidance and the small, quiet gestures of attentiveness he had shown, and she felt a growing curiosity mixed with concern about how their day had progressed after the morning encounter at Grand Central Station. The sidewalks were alive with the rhythms of city life, car horns honking in the distance, the faint murmur of conversations among pedestrians, and the occasional distant siren blending into the background, creating a symphony of urban motion. Sarah paused for a moment at a street corner, observing a father helping his child navigate the crosswalk, a scene that mirrored the memory of Grant and Nathan, and she smiled softly at the reminder of the interconnectedness of small acts of care in daily life. Grant, meanwhile, had returned home after a series of professional meetings that had demanded his attention and focus. He entered the penthouse quietly, careful not to disturb Nathan, who was engaged in creative play with blocks and action figures in the living room. Grant observed his son for a few moments, appreciating the innocence and joy that radiated from the boy, a stark contrast to the structured, high-stakes environment of corporate leadership he navigated during the day. He knelt beside Nathan, listening to his imaginative storytelling, offering guidance, and asking questions that encouraged creativity and reflection, reinforcing the bond between father and child. Across town, Sarah settled at a quiet cafe near the edge of the park, her notebook open and pen in hand. She began to jot observations and reflections about the morning encounter, about the father and son, and about the subtle yet meaningful ways in which empathy and attentiveness shaped human interactions. Each detail, from the father's careful adjustment of the child's backpack to the boy's shy but trusting smile, was recorded with attention, the narrative unfolding in her mind as a story that could influence her understanding of human connection and the impact of small, deliberate acts. Grant, after ensuring Nathan was occupied with a quiet activity, sat at his home office desk, reviewing documents for upcoming projects while simultaneously reflecting on the morning encounter. The memory of Sarah's generosity, of her willingness to place the needs of a stranger ahead of her own convenience, lingered persistently in his thoughts. He considered how rare such genuine empathy was in a world dominated by deadlines, schedules, and transactional interactions, and he felt a subtle sense of intrigue and admiration for the character and integrity displayed in that brief encounter. Nathan, sensing his father's reflective mood, asked a series of questions about the city below, about trains, and about the stories they might encounter along the streets. Grant responded with care, weaving explanations with imagination, encouraging curiosity while reinforcing the trust and safety of their relationship. Meanwhile, Sarah, observing families and children in the park outside the cafe, noticed the small gestures of care and attention taking place, parents guiding children, neighbors offering assistance, and strangers exchanging brief acts of courtesy. She reflected on how these moments mirrored her own experience that morning, the ripple effect of one simple decision touching lives in unexpected ways, reinforcing her understanding of human empathy and the power of kindness. Grant concluded his document review and stepped out onto the terrace adjoining his office, overlooking the streets below, where the constant motion of the city provided both contrast and perspective. He considered the delicate balance between his professional obligations and parental responsibilities, recognizing that his attentiveness to Nathan and reflection on the morning encounter with Sarah were equally important in shaping the values and lessons he wished to impart as both a father and a leader. Nathan, momentarily pausing from play, looked toward the terrace and called for his father, prompting a gentle response and a brief conversation that reinforced connection and reassurance. Sarah, finishing her notes, gathered her belongings and stepped onto the city sidewalk, feeling the cool evening air and reflecting on the unfolding connections between her, Grant, and Nathan. She considered the invisible thread linking their lives, the consequences of small acts, and the subtle influence of empathy and attentiveness on human experience. Grant, re-entering the apartment from the terrace, checked on Nathan before preparing a light snack. And in the quiet rhythm of the evening, he reflected on the ways in which moments of generosity, human connection, and attention to others' needs could shape decisions, relationships, and the trajectory of lives in ways that neither he nor Sarah could fully anticipate. The day continued to wind down, each small interaction, reflection, and deliberate choice reinforcing the emerging narrative of empathy, understanding, and the unfolding intertwining of lives, subtly setting the stage for the encounters, revelations, and emotional developments yet to come between Sarah, Grant, and Nathan. The following morning dawned with a soft, overcast light filtering through the tall windows of Sarah Adams' apartment, painting the room in muted shades of gray and gold. She sipped her steaming cup of tea, the warmth spreading through her hands and lending a small comfort against the crisp autumn air outside. Her thoughts, as they had been for several days now, lingered on Grant Hamilton and his young son, Nathan. The father's patience and attentiveness, the careful way he guided his son through the crowded station, and the subtle gratitude he had shown for her small act of generosity had left a lasting impression. She reflected on the interplay between her own choices and the unexpected consequences that unfolded from them, the way that a simple gesture could reverberate far beyond its initial moment, touching lives in unforeseen ways. Grant, in his penthouse apartment across the city, had already begun his morning routine, reviewing financial reports and preparing for a series of meetings that would demand precision, attention, and strategic thinking. Despite the pressing obligations of his professional life, his thoughts repeatedly returned to the previous encounter with Sarah, the memory of her selflessness sparking a quiet curiosity about her character and intentions. Nathan, brushing his teeth and humming a tune from the children's program he had watched the evening before, glanced up at his father and asked questions about the trains and streets he had seen, prompting Grant to kneel beside him and provide explanations that blended factual information with imaginative storytelling. The rhythm of this morning routine, so ordinary yet meaningful, offered Grant a sense of grounding amidst the high stakes and relentless demands of corporate leadership. Across town, Sarah prepared to leave for her workplace, adjusting her coat against the crisp morning breeze and gathering her satchel and notebook. She walked briskly through the bustling streets, observing families, commuters, and the subtle acts of care that punctuated daily life, parents helping children, neighbors assisting one another, and strangers exchanging brief gestures of courtesy. Each scene reminded her of the morning at Grand Central Station, the father and child, and the way that a single act of kindness could set into motion a series of interactions and reflections that extended far beyond the moment itself. Grant, having escorted Nathan to the enrichment program and ensured the boy was comfortably engaged with peers and activities, returned briefly to the penthouse to review documents for the day's meetings. The memory of Sarah's generosity lingered in his mind, a quiet reminder of the importance of empathy and attentiveness in a world often dominated by schedules, obligations, and transactional interactions. He considered the rarity of encountering someone whose actions were guided solely by consideration for others, and he found himself quietly intrigued by the character of the young woman who had displayed such selfless initiative. Nathan, now occupied with creative play, asked occasional questions that prompted Grant to provide guidance, fostering both curiosity and confidence. Sarah, walking briskly toward the subway station, reflected on the subtle threads of connection and influence that had emerged from the brief encounter, considering how lives intersect through acts of empathy and attention, even in a vast, bustling city where most people remain strangers to one another. Grant, stepping onto the terrace to take a momentary breath of fresh air, gazed over the streets below, the patterns of movement and light creating a sense of order amidst the controlled chaos of urban life. He contemplated the balance between his professional responsibilities, parental duties, and the unexpected resonance of human connection, the realization that kindness and attentiveness could influence perspectives, decisions, and relationships in ways not immediately apparent. Sarah, descending into the subway, noted the small details of her surroundings, the careful guidance of parents, the polite gestures of commuters, the quiet attentiveness that often went unnoticed. Each observation reinforced her understanding of the power of human empathy and the subtle ways that ordinary actions could ripple outward to affect the lives of others, as she had witnessed in Grant and Nathan. Grant, after a brief period of reflection on the terrace, returned to his office to finalize preparation for a meeting with a potential investor. Yet his mind remained partially occupied by thoughts of Sarah, the stranger whose selfless act had left an enduring impression. He recognized the significance of her choice, how it had influenced his perception and prompted contemplation about the importance of empathy in both personal and professional realms. Nathan, engaged in constructive play and learning activities, called out occasionally to share observations and discoveries with his father, who responded with encouragement and thoughtful attention, reinforcing their close bond. Sarah, seated briefly on a bench before entering her office building, observed the interactions of people around her, noting the subtleties of care, attentiveness, and patience displayed in everyday life, and reflected on the impact of her own gesture that morning, understanding that it had created an invisible thread of influence connecting her life with those of Grant and Nathan. The day progressed with both Sarah and Grant immersed in their respective routines, yet the quiet awareness of each other's presence and the memory of the shared encounter persisted, creating a subtle tension and anticipation. This awareness underscored the significance of empathy, attentiveness, and the unforeseen consequences of human connection, setting the stage for the evolving narrative, the challenges, and the emotional developments that would continue to intertwine their lives in ways neither could fully anticipate, highlighting the profound effect of one small act of generosity and the human capacity for care and reflection in shaping the course of events. The late afternoon brought a gentle warmth to the streets of New York City, the golden light reflecting off the glass windows of skyscrapers and illuminating the bustling sidewalks filled with commuters, families, and children playing in small clusters along the parks and corners. Sarah Adams walked briskly through the familiar streets, her coat tightly wrapped around her shoulders, her satchel swinging lightly with each step. Her thoughts, as they had been throughout the day, lingered on Grant Hamilton and his young son, Nathan, the image of their earlier encounter at Grand Central Station vivid in her mind. She recalled the father's careful guidance, the small, protective gestures he had made toward his son, and the subtle gratitude that had passed between them in the quiet, almost imperceptible way that spoke volumes about character and integrity. Meanwhile, Grant had returned home after a series of back-to-back meetings that had demanded his attention and focus. He stepped into the apartment quietly, careful not to disturb Nathan, who was engaged in an art project on the living room rug, small hands holding colored pencils as he carefully filled in illustrations in a workbook. Grant knelt beside him, offering gentle guidance and encouragement, his presence calm and deliberate, a stark contrast to the high-pressure, fast-paced world of corporate leadership he navigated daily. Nathan looked up at his father with a question about shadows and light, prompting Grant to explain in simple, playful terms, bridging curiosity and learning, while also reinforcing the bond between parent and child. Across town, Sarah entered a small park near her apartment, finding a bench tucked beneath an old oak tree. She opened her notebook and began to jot observations, reflections, and ideas, her mind tracing back over the morning at the train station. Each detailed the father adjusting the child's coat, the careful way he held the small hand of Nathan, the fleeting smile of acknowledgement resonated in her thoughts, illustrating the profound effect of even the smallest acts of human kindness. Grant, after ensuring Nathan was settled with a light snack and comfortable in the living room, stepped onto the terrace adjoining the apartment, overlooking the streets below. The city moved with relentless rhythm beneath him, yet he found a moment of stillness in observing the interplay of light, motion, and human interaction. His thoughts returned once again to Sarah, the stranger whose selfless action had unexpectedly left an impression on him, highlighting the contrast between her instinctive generosity and the calculated decision-making that dominated his professional world. Nathan, still absorbed in his drawing, occasionally asked questions about buildings, colors, and shapes, prompting explanations from Grant that blended educational content with imaginative storytelling, nurturing both understanding and creativity. Sarah, seated on the park bench, watched families walk together, observed parents guiding children, and noticed neighbors exchanging small acts of courtesy, each instance reinforcing her understanding of empathy, attentiveness, and the way that individual actions could ripple outward into the lives of others. She reflected on her own decision to give up the train ticket, understanding how that one simple gesture had influenced Grant and Nathan's morning, and considering the unseen ways in which it could continue to resonate. Grant, finishing a brief call with his assistant to adjust the evening schedule, returned to Nathan and discussed plans for a small indoor activity, ensuring that his son felt included and supported while balancing the responsibilities awaiting him in the professional realm. The afternoon light softened as the sun moved lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the penthouse floors, and the gentle hum of city life continued in the background, blending with the quiet, deliberate rhythm of domestic life within the apartment. Sarah, finishing her notes and observations, stood and began the walk back toward her apartment building, her pace steady and deliberate as she reflected on the invisible threads that connected people, the ways in which one individual's attentiveness and empathy could influence the trajectory of another person's day or even life. Grant, preparing for the transition from parental duties to evening professional commitments, reflected on the delicate balance required to manage both worlds effectively, the memory of Sarah's kindness serving as a touchstone in a day often dominated by numbers, schedules, and obligations. Nathan, still drawing and chatting with his father, displayed excitement and engagement, prompting Grant to respond with patience, attention, and gentle guidance, reinforcing the lessons of care, observation, and curiosity. The city outside continued its relentless flow, taxis honking, subways rumbling beneath the streets, and pedestrians moving in constant motion. Yet within the quiet spaces of thought, reflection, and domestic engagement, the subtle influence of Sarah's generosity persisted. Both Grant and Sarah, immersed in their separate activities, remained unconsciously connected by the shared memory of that morning. The invisible bond of kindness and attentiveness, shaping thoughts, reflections, and actions. As the day slowly progressed toward evening, the stage was quietly set for encounters, decisions, and revelations that would further intertwine their lives, emphasizing the power of empathy, deliberate attentiveness, and the unforeseen consequences of simple human acts, laying the foundation for a narrative in which connection, understanding, and emotional resonance would continue to unfold between Sarah, Grant, and Nathan. The early evening cast a warm, amber glow across the streets of New York City, the tall buildings reflecting the soft light as commuters hurried along sidewalks, some with children in tow, others balancing briefcases and shopping bags, the city alive with a constant hum of movement and conversation. Sarah Adams, walking briskly toward the edge of a community center where she often volunteered, felt a subtle anticipation in her chest. She reflected on the father and child she had encountered at Grand Central Station, the careful attentiveness of Grant Hamilton toward his young son, Nathan, and the quiet gratitude expressed for her small act of generosity. Her mind traced the moments in vivid detail, the way his dark hair fell slightly over his forehead, the gentle but firm manner in which he adjusted Nathan's jacket, and the way Nathan clutched his stuffed bear as they navigated the crowded space together. Each recollection reinforced her curiosity about the man and his son, and she wondered whether their paths might cross again, perhaps under circumstances that would reveal more about the lives of the strangers whose momentary presence had unexpectedly touched hers. Grant, in his penthouse apartment, had just returned from an afternoon of meetings with clients and executives, the weight of corporate responsibility pressing against him, as he reviewed reports and project updates. Despite the intensity of his work, his thoughts kept returning to the morning at Grand Central Station, the brief encounter with Sarah, and the unexpected impression her empathy had left on him. Nathan, busy arranging blocks and drawing in a coloring book on the living room rug, occasionally glanced up at his father with wide, curious eyes, asking questions about shapes, colors, and the trains they had seen earlier in the week. Grant responded patiently, kneeling beside his son, explaining concepts while weaving in imaginative storytelling, creating a blend of education, creativity, and reassurance that strengthened their bond. Across town, Sarah settled on a bench near a small park, notebook open and pen in hand, recording her thoughts and reflections. She described the subtleties of human behavior, the quiet gestures of care and attention that often went unnoticed, and the profound impact that one small, deliberate action could have on the trajectory of others' lives. The memory of Grant's careful guidance of Nathan and the boy's trusting glance remained vivid, reinforcing her sense of the interconnectedness of human experience and the significance of empathy and attentiveness. Grant, concluding his review of financial documents, took a brief pause to stand on the terrace adjoining the penthouse, gazing over the streets below. The city stretched in every direction, lights beginning to flicker as the sun dipped toward the horizon, the continuous movement of vehicles and pedestrians offering a backdrop to his reflective thoughts. He considered the contrast between the high-stakes, calculated decisions of his professional life and the simplicity yet profound impact of the kindness he had received that morning. Nathan, seated on the rug and now building a miniature city with his blocks, asked about the trains and streets they had observed, prompting Grant to provide patient, imaginative explanations that combined factual learning with playful storytelling. Meanwhile, Sarah, observing families and children walking past in the park, noted the small acts of attentiveness and care, each instance reinforcing her understanding of empathy as a force that shaped interactions and influenced lives. Grant, after finishing his reflections, returned to Nathan, ensuring the boy had a healthy snack and was prepared for the evening's activities, maintaining a balance between guidance, care, and encouraging independence. Sarah, finishing her notes, gathered her belongings and began the walk back toward her apartment, her pace deliberate as she reflected on the unfolding connections between herself, Grant, and Nathan. She considered how one simple choice to give up a train ticket had initiated a subtle chain of interactions and reflections that continued to influence their respective days. Grant, observing Nathan's excitement and engagement in his evening activities, felt a sense of quiet fulfillment, acknowledging the influence of the morning's encounter with Sarah and how her kindness had prompted reflection on his own priorities and values. The sun set slowly, casting elongated shadows and bathing the city in warm light, the urban rhythm continuing with the hum of traffic, distant conversations, and the occasional siren weaving into the evening soundscape. Sarah and Grant, each immersed in their own routines, yet connected by the shared memory of a brief but meaningful encounter, carried an unspoken awareness of each other's presence, the invisible thread of human connection guiding their thoughts and shaping the trajectory of the moments that would follow. Nathan, calling out for his father to explain the next step in his imaginative play, received patient guidance and encouragement, reinforcing a sense of trust and security. Sarah, reaching her apartment building, paused briefly to observe the city lights, considering the ways in which empathy, attentiveness, and quiet generosity could bridge the gaps between strangers, subtly altering the course of lives and setting the stage for the next chapter in a narrative defined by connection, understanding, and the unforeseen consequences of human kindness. Grant, settling Nathan for the evening and reflecting on the day, understood the significance of these small yet impactful moments, recognizing that the simple gestures of empathy and attentiveness they had experienced were shaping the emotional and relational landscape of their lives in ways neither could yet fully anticipate. The following morning broke with a soft, hazy light filtering through the high windows of Grant Hamilton's penthouse, casting gentle reflections across the polished floors and the sleek surfaces of modern furnishings. Grant was already awake, reviewing emails and financial projections at his glass-topped desk, the city skyline stretching endlessly beyond the window as taxis honked and pedestrians hurried along the sidewalks below. Nathan was still nestled under his comforter, the young boy's steady breathing signaling deep sleep. and Grant paused to observe him for a moment, appreciating the innocence and vitality that contrasted so starkly with the structured, high-pressure environment of corporate leadership. Across town, Sarah Adams prepared for her day, the city alive with the ambient sounds of commuters, distant sirens, and the hum of conversation blending into a rhythmic backdrop. She sipped her coffee, gathered her satchel, and reflected on the father and child she had helped at Grand Central Station, recalling the careful attention Grant had shown Nathan and the boys' trusting, wide-eyed expressions. The memory lingered in her mind as a quiet, motivating thread throughout the day, influencing her thoughts, actions, and expectations of human interaction. Grant, after ensuring Nathan was awake and dressed, guided the young boy through the morning routine with patience and attentiveness, balancing parental care with the attention to detail and planning that his executive responsibilities demanded. Nathan asked about the streets below, the trains, and the patterns of movement he observed, prompting explanations from his father that combined factual information with imaginative storytelling, reinforcing both knowledge and curiosity. Sarah, navigating the crowded sidewalks toward her office, noticed small acts of kindness around her parents helping children, strangers assisting one another, neighbors exchanging brief courtesies, and reflected on the subtle yet significant impact of empathy, realizing that the small act she had performed by giving up her ticket had initiated a ripple effect that would continue to unfold in ways she could not yet fully anticipate. Grant, having completed a brief period of work while Nathan engaged in independent play, prepared to escort his son to the enrichment program for the morning session, securing his backpack, ensuring his coat was properly fastened, and guiding him gently through the building lobby, with a watchful eye on the activity around them. Nathan's chatter, full of curiosity and questions, prompted patient, thoughtful responses from Grant, reinforcing a sense of security, attentiveness, and mutual respect between father and son. Sarah, arriving at her workplace, began the day's tasks with focus and efficiency, yet her mind occasionally wandered to the father and child, wondering how they were navigating their morning, how the boys' experiences and her small act of generosity might continue to resonate, and whether further intersections of their lives might occur in the days ahead. Grant arrived at the enrichment program and ensured Nathan was comfortably settled, observing the young boy interact with peers and instructors, providing guidance only when necessary, and allowing Nathan to explore, create, and build confidence independently. As Grant stepped back to make a brief phone call to his assistant, coordinating afternoon schedules and confirming meetings, his mind continued to reflect on Sarah's kindness, the quiet impact of human empathy, and the ways in which one deliberate action could resonate far beyond the immediate moment, influencing perceptions, decisions, and relationships in subtle, unforeseen ways. Nathan, occupied with a small project building miniature structures, occasionally looked up to share progress or ask questions, prompting Grant to respond with encouragement, guidance, and attentive observation. Sarah, stepping outside for a short walk during a brief break, watched children playing in a nearby park, parents guiding and conversing with their offspring, and the subtle, unspoken acts of support occurring among strangers in the city. Each observation reinforced her understanding of the importance of empathy, attentiveness, and the subtle ripple effects of small gestures. Grant, after completing the call, observed Nathan for a few moments from the doorway, ensuring comfort, safety, and engagement, then returned to his own professional responsibilities, mentally noting the value of integrating reflection on human connection into his decisions and approach to leadership. Across the city, Sarah continued to record thoughts in her notebook, capturing observations, reflections, and the resonance of her interaction with Grant and Nathan, noting the influence of kindness and attentiveness in shaping perceptions and human relationships. The morning continued to unfold, with both Sarah and Grant immersed in their respective routines, yet the quiet, invisible thread connecting them through empathy and shared human experience persisted, creating a tension and anticipation that would guide decisions, reflections, and potential encounters in the days to follow. Nathan, lively and curious, asked occasional questions about trains, buildings, and city life, prompting Grant to respond patiently, blending instruction with storytelling, reinforcing a sense of security, confidence, and engagement. Sarah, walking back toward her office after a brief pause, observed the city with attentiveness, recognizing the subtleties of human interaction and the ways in which deliberate acts of kindness could influence the flow of daily life. The city continued its constant motion, yet within the reflective, attentive spaces of both Sarah and Grant, the invisible bonds of human connection, empathy, and responsiveness were quietly shaping the narrative, setting the stage for unforeseen developments, emotional revelations, and decisions that would continue to intertwine their lives in meaningful ways. The afternoon sun had begun its slow descent over the city skyline, bathing the streets of New York in a warm, golden light that reflected off glass windows and metallic surfaces, creating a kaleidoscope of urban colors and shadows. Sarah Adams walked briskly toward the community center. The familiar sounds of the city, the distant wail of a siren, the rhythmic clatter of subway trains, the chatter of pedestrians, and the occasional bark of a dog forming a constant, energetic hum that underscored her thoughts. She reflected on the father and child she had encountered at Grand Central Station days before, recalling the careful way Grant Hamilton had guided his young son, Nathan, through the bustling crowds, and the small but meaningful expressions of gratitude exchanged in silence. Each detail remained vivid in her mind, the way Nathan clutched his stuffed bear, the slight crease of worry in Grant's forehead as he balanced his responsibilities, and the young boy's safety, and the genuine empathy in his eyes that had left a lasting impression. Meanwhile, Grant had returned to his penthouse after a series of mid-afternoon meetings with investors and department heads. The weight of corporate responsibilities pressed heavily upon him, yet he carried a quiet awareness of the morning encounter with Sarah, the stranger whose small act of generosity had unexpectedly sparked reflection and curiosity. Nathan, seated on the living room rug and absorbed in constructing towers with colorful blocks, occasionally looked up at his father, asking questions about shapes, colors, and the stories that connected them, prompting Grant to respond with patience and creativity, blending factual explanation with imaginative storytelling. Across town, Sarah entered the community center and began arranging materials for an afternoon volunteer program, helping children and families engage in creative and educational activities. She moved with intention and focus, yet her thoughts often drifted back to Grant and Nathan, contemplating how one small act of kindness could initiate a ripple effect, influencing perceptions, interactions, and the subtle emotional currents that guided human behavior. Grant, observing Nathan's engagement with a small group of children, ensured that his son had the necessary guidance without overstepping, allowing him to explore, interact, and learn independently. Grant reflected on the contrast between the structured, high-stakes environment of his professional life and the simplicity yet profound significance of the moments spent observing and participating in Nathan's play, each requiring attentiveness, patience, and presence. Nathan's small questions and bursts of curiosity prompted Grant to provide thoughtful responses, creating a balance of guidance and encouragement that reinforced confidence and trust. Sarah, stepping outside during a brief break, walked along a tree-lined path near the center, observing families, children, and the subtle acts of care taking place among strangers, all reinforcing her understanding of the impact of empathy and attentiveness. She reflected on her own actions and the morning at Grand Central Station, considering how her decision to give up the train ticket had set into motion a series of experiences and reflections in the lives of both Grant and Nathan, and how these connections, though invisible and indirect, continued to shape the unfolding narrative. Grant, concluding his observation of Nathan, stepped into a quieter corner to make a phone call to his assistant, confirming schedules and minor adjustments, while simultaneously reflecting on the significance of Sarah's generosity. He realized how rare it was to encounter someone whose actions were entirely selfless, acting purely from consideration for another, and this awareness prompted a growing curiosity about her character and the potential for future interactions. Nathan, happily engaged with creative play, occasionally looked toward his father for reassurance or guidance, and Grant responded with attentive, deliberate care, reinforcing a sense of security and nurturing a positive, trusting relationship. Sarah, returning to the community center after her brief walk, continued facilitating activities with children, noting moments of cooperation, encouragement, and mutual respect, and reflecting on how these mirrored the subtle dynamics of human connection she had witnessed in Grant and Nathan. The city outside remained in constant motion, yet within the quiet spaces of observation, reflection, and attentiveness, both Sarah and Grant were influenced by the morning encounter, each carrying the subtle awareness of connection, empathy, and the influence of small, deliberate actions. As the late afternoon continued, Grant prepared to conclude his responsibilities at the center and accompany Nathan home, ensuring the boy's day ended with comfort, security, and engagement, while Sarah wrapped up her volunteer activities. The mental thread, linking her to Grant and Nathan, persisting subtly but undeniably. Each step, each reflection, each observed gesture reinforced the invisible bond created through human kindness, attentiveness, and empathy, quietly shaping decisions, interactions, and the unfolding narrative that would continue to intertwine the lives of Sarah, Grant, and Nathan in ways that were only beginning to emerge, highlighting the importance of deliberate action, care, and the profound, sometimes unseen consequences of small acts of generosity and attentiveness in the shaping of human relationships and experience. The sun was beginning its slow descent, casting a warm, honeyed glow over the streets of New York City. And the city's constant rhythm of movement and sound honking taxis, pedestrians chatting as they walked, the faint rumble of subway trains created a familiar backdrop as Sarah Adams navigated her way toward the local park for a brief moment of reflection. Her mind remained occupied with the memory of Grant Hamilton and his young son, Nathan, from the morning at Grand Central Station. She recalled with vivid clarity the father's careful guidance, the subtle expressions of gratitude, and the boy's wide-eyed curiosity, and she felt a quiet anticipation about the ways their lives might continue to intersect. Across town, Grant Hamilton had returned to his penthouse after the afternoon at the enrichment program, where he had ensured Nathan was engaged, safe, and happy. Nathan now sat cross-legged on the living room rug, constructing a small city out of colored blocks, his imagination running freely as his father observed with a warm smile. Grant knelt beside him, gently asking questions about the towers and streets, encouraging creative storytelling while reinforcing lessons of attention, patience, and problem-solving. Grant's thoughts occasionally drifted back to Sarah, the stranger whose selfless act of giving up her train ticket had left an unexpected impression. He considered the contrast between her instinctive generosity and the carefully calculated decisions of his professional life, recognizing the rarity and value of such empathy. The afternoon light shifted to a soft, golden hue, highlighting the contrast between the quiet domesticity inside the penthouse and the relentless activity of the streets below. Nathan giggled as he added tiny figures to his miniature city, prompting Grant to provide guidance, incorporate storytelling, and celebrate the boys' creativity, reinforcing their bond and the importance of attentiveness in both parenting and leadership. Meanwhile, Sarah found a quiet bench in the park, the crisp air carrying the sounds of children playing, parents chatting, and distant traffic blending into a soothing urban symphony. She opened her notebook and began recording reflections on the morning encounter, the father's attentiveness, the boy's trust, and the subtle ways human kindness could influence perception, decision-making, and behavior far beyond the immediate moment. Grant, finishing a brief review of his work emails, decided to prepare a light snack for Nathan while reflecting on the day's events. He considered the long hours he devoted to corporate leadership, the demands on his time, and the ways in which small moments of empathy, like Sarah's gesture, had a profound emotional resonance that could shift perspective and influence interactions, both personal and professional. Nathan, nibbling on an apple slice, looked up and asked questions about the trains, the city streets, and the buildings he observed outside the window. Grant responded patiently, integrating education, storytelling, and imaginative explanations that nurtured both learning and confidence, emphasizing attentiveness and care in every interaction. Sarah, walking slowly through the park, observed the subtle interactions around her parents, helping children navigate small obstacles, neighbors assisting one another, strangers exchanging courteous gestures, and she reflected on how these moments mirrored the quiet impact of her actions that morning. She considered the invisible threads of connection linking herself to Grant and Nathan, how empathy and attentiveness could ripple outward, and how seemingly insignificant decisions might carry unforeseen consequences, subtly shaping experiences and relationships. Grant, after ensuring Nathan was settled and engaged in a quiet activity, stepped onto the terrace to watch the city transition from afternoon to evening. The long shadows stretching across streets and rooftops, and reflected on the balance between professional responsibility and parental care, the quiet moments of observation, guidance, and interaction with his son offering perspective, grounding, and emotional resonance. Nathan, momentarily pausing his play, glanced at his father, prompting a brief conversation about his creations, and Grant responded with encouragement, inquiry, and careful attention, reinforcing a sense of trust and security. Sarah, finishing her notes in the park, observed the changing light, the interplay of movement, conversation, and gestures among the city's inhabitants, and contemplated the subtle but powerful influence of attentiveness, kindness, and empathy in shaping the unfolding narrative of human connection. Grant, returning to check on Nathan and preparing a light activity for him, reflected on the emotional significance of Sarah's generosity, how it had prompted reflection on his own values, priorities, and the importance of small, deliberate acts in shaping both personal and relational experiences. The streets outside continued their steady rhythm, a symphony of movement and sound, yet within the quiet spaces of the penthouse and the park, the lives of Sarah, Grant, and Nathan were subtly intertwined, each thought, action, and reflection reinforcing the invisible thread of human connection, empathy, and attentiveness. As the golden hour transitioned toward evening, the foundations were quietly laid for further encounters, revelations, and decisions, shaping the unfolding story of their intertwined lives, and illustrating the profound yet often unseen power of small acts of kindness, attentive observation, and deliberate empathy in influencing the trajectory of human experience, relationships, and emotional resonance. The evening sky was painted in shades of orange and lavender as the sun slowly disappeared behind the New York City skyline, and the streets below pulsed with life, the hum of traffic, the chatter of pedestrians, and the distant wail of a subway train, forming a continuous urban symphony. Sarah Adams walked through the bustling streets, her coat pulled tightly around her shoulders against the crisp autumn air, and she carried a quiet anticipation, the memory of Grant Hamilton and his young son, Nathan, lingering vividly in her mind. She recalled the careful attentiveness Grant had shown to Nathan, the boy's trusting smile, and the subtle gratitude expressed for her act of giving up her train ticket, and she felt a deep curiosity about the ways their lives might continue to intersect. Across town, Grant returned to his penthouse apartment after a series of late afternoon meetings, the responsibilities of running a major technology firm weighing heavily on him. Yet his thoughts repeatedly returned to the morning encounter at Grand Central Station. He paused for a moment at the terrace, overlooking the city streets below, reflecting on the rare empathy he had witnessed and the quiet, profound impact it had left on him. Nathan, now seated at the living room rug with his coloring book and a collection of toys, occasionally looked up to ask questions about the buildings he saw from the window, the trains, and the people moving below. Grant knelt beside him, responding with thoughtful explanations that blended fact and imagination, nurturing curiosity while reinforcing a sense of security and attention. Sarah, passing through a small park on her way home, observed families walking together, children playing, and subtle acts of care and attentiveness unfolding around her, each scene echoing the lessons she had witnessed in Grant and Nathan. She reflected on how one small act of kindness, performed without expectation, could set off a chain of awareness, empathy, and influence that persisted quietly yet powerfully across multiple lives. Grant, preparing a light snack for Nathan while reviewing evening emails, considered the balance required between professional obligations and parental attentiveness. The memory of Sarah's generosity prompted a reflection on his own values, the importance of empathy, and the ways in which human connection, even in brief and fleeting encounters, could shape perspectives and decisions in both personal and professional spheres. Nathan, nibbling on a small piece of fruit, shared details about his day, prompting Grant to respond with encouragement, attentive listening, and guidance, reinforcing a bond defined by trust, communication, and mutual engagement. Sarah, finally reaching her apartment building, paused briefly to look at the city lights beginning to flicker on across the streets, thinking about the invisible threads that linked her to Grant and Nathan. She considered the subtle impact of attentiveness and empathy, the power of quiet, deliberate actions, and the ways in which human connection could emerge unexpectedly in the course of ordinary routines. Grant, finishing the preparation of Nathan's activity for the evening, stepped onto the terrace once more to observe the city from above, noting the rhythm of streets, the movement of people, and the interplay of light and shadow, while reflecting on the morning encounter with Sarah and the quiet resonance of her kindness in his mind. Nathan, engaged in an imaginative story involving trains, buildings, and miniature people, asked occasional questions that prompted thoughtful, deliberate responses from Grant, reinforcing lessons of care, attentiveness, and curiosity. Sarah, seated near a window in her apartment with her notebook open, recorded reflections on the events of the day, observing the subtle interactions in the city below, the human gestures of attentiveness and kindness, and the profound effect of small actions, noting how these experiences continued to shape her understanding of empathy and influence the trajectory of connected lives. Grant, observing Nathan with a smile, reflected on the ways in which small gestures of empathy, like Sarah's morning act, could influence awareness, decision-making, and personal growth, providing a lens through which to consider leadership, parenting, and human interaction. Nathan, finishing his story, looked to his father for affirmation, and Grant responded with warmth, encouragement, and attentive engagement, reinforcing the boy's confidence and curiosity. Sarah, looking out at the streets bathed in the last golden light of day, felt a sense of connection and anticipation, recognizing that the morning encounter had created an invisible bond of human connection, empathy, and attentiveness that subtly influenced thoughts, actions, and potential future interactions. The city continued its evening rhythm, the pulse of activity uninterrupted, yet within the quiet, reflective spaces of Sarah, Grant, and Nathan, the subtle resonance of one small act of generosity persisted, shaping decisions, reflections, and the unfolding narrative of human connection, empathy, and relational development. As the sky deepened into twilight, the stage was quietly set for the final chapter of this evolving story, with anticipation, emotional resonance, and the unseen power of attentiveness and kindness guiding the interconnected paths of Sarah, Grant, and Nathan toward the culmination of their shared journey. The evening had fully settled over New York City, the skyline glowing with countless lights reflecting in the windows of towering buildings, and the streets below alive with the quiet hum of cars, distant conversations, and the occasional wail of a subway train beneath the city. Sarah Adams walked through the final block toward her apartment building, her coat wrapped tightly against the cool night air, her satchel swinging lightly with each step. Her thoughts returned to Grant Hamilton and his young son, Nathan, the memory of that morning at Grand Central Station vivid and persistent in her mind. She recalled the careful attentiveness Grant had shown to his son, the gentle but firm guidance he provided, and the quiet gratitude he had expressed when she had given up her train ticket. Each detail, the small crease of concern on his forehead, Nathan's trusting smile, the way the boy clutched his stuffed bear, had etched itself into her memory as a moment of human connection that transcended ordinary interaction. Across town, Grant had returned to his penthouse after a late afternoon series of meetings, his attention focused on preparing for the following day, yet his thoughts continuously drifted to Sarah and the morning encounter. He stepped onto the terrace, overlooking the streets below, bathed in the warm glow of the evening lights, and allowed himself a moment to reflect. The contrast between the high stakes, strategic decisions of his professional life and the simple, profound impact of one person's selfless action weighed on him, highlighting the value of empathy, attentiveness, and the subtle power of human kindness. Nathan, seated on the living room rug, had organized his small toys into neat arrangements and was narrating a story to himself, the young boy's imagination vivid and unrestrained. Grant knelt beside him, engaging in the story, asking questions, encouraging details, and reinforcing lessons of attentiveness, care, and creative thinking, nurturing a bond built on trust and presence. Meanwhile, Sarah entered her apartment and settled near the window with her notebook, the city lights flickering like stars reflected in the streets below. She began to record reflections on the series of events since that morning, contemplating the ripple effects of one small act of generosity, the ways it had influenced Grant, shaped Nathan's day, and subtly affected her own understanding of human connection and the importance of empathy in everyday life. Grant, preparing a light snack for Nathan while reviewing notes for the next day, reflected on the unexpected ways people could influence each other, how small gestures of kindness had the capacity to resonate far beyond their immediate context, and how Sarah's action had inspired a quiet awareness of connection and attentiveness that contrasted with the transactional, high-pressure decisions he navigated in the corporate world. Nathan, nibbling on fruit and still immersed in imaginative play, occasionally glanced up at his father for guidance, receiving patient, thoughtful responses that reinforced a sense of security, attentiveness, and emotional support. Sarah, finishing a final note in her journal, stood and walked to the window, observing families walking together, children laughing and playing, and the subtle, everyday acts of care and consideration taking place in the streets below. She reflected on the invisible thread connecting her to Grant and Nathan, a bond initiated by a simple, selfless act, and now carrying the quiet promise of future interactions, understanding, and perhaps even friendship. Grant, observing Nathan settle into a quiet activity, took a moment on the terrace to reflect on his responsibilities as a parent and as a leader. Realizing the profound influence of attentiveness, kindness, and small gestures in shaping the emotional landscape of both personal and professional life. Nathan, curious and engaged, asked about the city and the trains, prompting Grant to provide patient explanations while weaving in imaginative storytelling that encouraged exploration, critical thinking, and confidence. Sarah, watching the night settle over the city from her apartment, felt a sense of quiet satisfaction, knowing that the small act of giving up a train ticket had initiated a chain of influence, reflection, and empathy that connected three lives in ways that were subtle, meaningful, and enduring. Grant, concluding his evening with Nathan, ensured the boy was prepared for bed, engaging in conversation that reinforced trust, attention, and emotional connection. He reflected on the ways in which Sarah's kindness had influenced his own perspective, reminding him of the importance of human empathy, attentiveness, and the power of deliberate, thoughtful actions. Nathan, sleepy but content, hugged his father before climbing into bed, the soft comfort of routine reinforcing a sense of safety, love, and connection. Sarah, putting her journal aside, gazed out at the city skyline and considered the ways that one simple gesture could ripple through lives, creating opportunities for connection, understanding, and shared experience that transcended ordinary daily life. As the city lights twinkled and the night deepened, the subtle thread of human kindness and attentiveness remained intact, linking Sarah, Grant, and Nathan in a quiet yet profound network of connection. The morning encounter that had begun with a single act of selfless generosity had now evolved into a shared story, rich with empathy, reflection, and the promise of ongoing interaction, illustrating the enduring impact of thoughtful, compassionate choices in shaping relationships, emotional understanding, and the unfolding narrative of intertwined lives in a complex, bustling world.